Over the course of 1 year, approximately 15,000 youth experience homelessness throughout Chicago, of which approximately up to 46% of these youth identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. How will you address youth homelessness as it relates to the LGBTQ community, specifically addressing the lack of housing options and lack of diversity training for service providers that deal with homelessness? My name is Tracy Boehm, and I'm publisher and executive editor for Windy City Times, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this first-of-its-kind LGBT-focused mayoral forum that has been organized by almost 30 organizations serving the LGBTQ community across Chicago. They're listed in, unfortunately, I don't think they're listed in the program, but they are listed in the Windy City Times and other places online. We'd like to first welcome Ray Crossman of the Adler School for Professional Psychology to the stage and thank them for hosting us tonight.
Thank you, Tracy. Please give a hand to Tracy Boehm, our moderator for this evening. I'm Raymond Crossman. I'm president of the Adler School, and welcome everyone to the Adler School. We are extremely honored to be hosting this historic forum. The Adler School prepares social justice practitioners whose central focus is pluralism, work with diverse and underserved communities, and inclusion, with great attention to LGBT communities. Tonight's event is consistent with the Adler School's work with LGBT issues. You may not know, for example, that we are proud that the largest student group at the Adler School is our LGBT student group, Adler Pride, who's helping out tonight. Thank you, Adler Pride. You may not know that the Adler School co-hosted this past summer the first gathering of LGBTQ presidents in higher ed from across the nation. And I want you to know that this coming fall, we are beginning a new initiative. We're beginning a Center for LGBTQ Mental Health. A position announcement for the founding director is on the center of our website. So please check that out. And we look forward to working with you to make health services more relevant and more accessible to LGBTQ people. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to work with the 32 sponsoring organizations for tonight's event. So on behalf of the school's trustees, staff, faculty, students, welcome and thank you. We do have two trustees here tonight of the Adler School who I want to recognize and who join me in greeting you to the event. There is Bill Greaves from the Mayor's Office and trustee of the Adler School. And there's David Sinsky, Executive Director of After School Matters and trustee of the Adler School. From all of us here, thank you to each of the 32 sponsoring organizations. Thank you all for participating and being here tonight. Thank you to the media here for covering this important forum. And thank you to each of the candidates here to discuss our issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. We wanted to first acknowledge that there was a conflicting event that was rescheduled to happen tonight. So there are two candidates that could not make it because their luck of the draw with this conflicted too intensely with the Defender Forum. Gary Chico was here earlier, but we were not able to accommodate him coming earlier, and he definitely sends his support. And Patricia Watkins also could not make it because she was later in the draw. However, Doc Walls will be coming, so we'll have a short gap between folks, but we will have 4 of the candidates here tonight. I'm going to first start by mentioning a few ground rules. In your program, you will find the audience expectations that have been set forth in this program. We ask that you please review those expectations as failure to follow any of the rules listed or behaving in any way that might be disruptive to tonight's event may result in your being asked to leave or removal from the venue. By the way, I'm reading these. I did not write these. I would also like to remind you to please turn off all electronic devices that may make noise. Also, please refrain from the use of flash photography during this evening. We also have set forth expectations for the candidates, which are listed in your program as well. Before we welcome our first candidate this evening, I would like to give you the rundown of our format. We will welcome each candidate separately, and we'll ask them each 5 questions related to issues that have been identified by the coalition. Those issues are education, HIV/AIDS, youth homelessness, transgender issues, and public safety. The candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each question. 3 of the questions that the candidate will answer will be from questions that have been formulated by the coalition, and 2 will be from the questions that were submitted prior to the forum by audience members. With that, I would like to welcome our first candidate, Rahm Emanuel.
Can I just say something? Those are incredible rules. I could have used those in the White House.
Well, we know you set some strong rules. Your first question will be related to
I'm glad. I think that's in violation of Rule 3. But I'll let that go. That's okay. It gives me an extra minute on the question. Okay.
Would you support CPS administration or take a leadership role with no administrative leadership in mandating professional development for all school personnel on dealing with bullying, harassment, and violence issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity to ensure compliance with the new law in Illinois, SB 3266, Prevent School Violence Illinois? How will you ensure that appropriate strategies and programs are put in place, and what positions, if any, would you create to oversee this process?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for hosting this forum. And second of all, I want to thank Adler for doing this here. I was talking to Ray beforehand. As I said to Ray, he said we moved in, and I had never been here. We moved here in August. I said, well, that was pre me being a resident, so I'd never seen this, so I appreciate that. Second, let me on all seriousness. I wrote an op-ed in Windy City Times a couple months ago on bullying. Number one, because I think it is a major issue. Two, I think whoever I select as CEO of the schools has to share my concerns as the priority of this issue. Number three, I have focused on education overall, on the importance of principals, teachers, and parents. That those were going to be the priorities I invested in and raised. Now the truth is, you can have a very active mayor. I will be. You can have a CEO who shares the philosophy of the mayor, and we will, because this will be something I will ask in the interview process as we select a new CEO. But if you have just a mayor and a CEO of the CPS, while significant, if you're not involving the principals, you're not making sure the teachers throughout the city, not just in some neighborhoods, but throughout the city, are not educated and sensitized to this issue, and in addition to that, the parents, then you're basically not firing at all pistons. And so while the CEO will be the leader of the school system, and it will be a priority for them, and it will be part of the interview process as I look for a new CEO to direct the public school system, this will be one of the questions I'll be asking, because they will know up front this is one of the things that the mayor is interested in. Because it also affects, let's be honest, I've been up at Halstead Street Center. One of the things that they issue there are CTA pass cards. Why do they issue them there? Because a lot of kids who are being bullied at school are homeless. And the Halstead Street Center is taking care of those kids by making sure they have access in the evenings, even though I've laid out a policy on homeless, making sure kids have a place to go, which is, unfortunately, the CTA that they ride all night. So I want to be clear. The mayor cares about this. The CEO cares about it. And the priorities I've placed on education overall to reforming our school system will rely on the making sure that the other parts of reinforcing a message on this will be the principals, teachers, and the parents, who will also know that they have a role to play to sensitizing the schools, to sensitizing the student body population, and to a nurturing environment for kids who are dealing with the issue of coming out and being gay and lesbian and comfortable with that at an early age.
Thank you. Your second question will be related to HIV and AIDS. This question comes from Stephen Armstead of Brownsville. What will you do to make HIV awareness and education a priority in low-income communities?
Look, this touches on a number of issues. One, Chicago is responsible for public health. We have a flu epidemic. We're responsible for it. Dealing with HIV and AIDS, that's a public health issue. Today, the Chicago Public Health is also running 9 community clinics, delivering health care. Does that mean? I don't have anything on, so, all right. And the county is responsible for delivering on the public health. And the city is getting away from its core functions, which is making sure it has the resources for dealing with HIV/AIDS throughout the city, not just in parts of the city. Because gay and lesbian members of our society and our city live all over the city. And so we will make sure by focusing on what are the core functions of the public health, which HIV/AIDS in both resource-wise and delivering those services throughout the city are available by making sure our public health is dealing with public health, not delivery just of service.
Okay, thank you. I think the mic is very sensitive, so if...
So am I.
Yeah. So...
I'm a middle child.
So if you can...
Obviously another middle child, that was a little too much. Okay.
I was a middle child, too.
We wrote a book, War or Peace. We could do either one.
So if you can stay a little closer to the mic, I think, so the back can hear you well. Your third question will be related to youth homelessness. Over the course of 1 year, approximately 15,000 youth experience homelessness throughout Chicago, of which approximately up to 46% of these youth identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. How will you address youth homelessness as it relates to the LGBTQ community, specifically addressing the lack of housing options and lack of diversity training for service providers that deal with homelessness?
Well, I think I've somewhat dealt with that question earlier in the first question, dealing with young gay and lesbian kids in high school. Now, the day after the blizzard, one of the things I did was go to a homeless shelter and pledge what we were going to deal with as a city, dealing with eradicating homelessness in the city. The mayor's laid out a good plan. I'm going to make sure we have the resources to see that plan through to completion. It's a comprehensive program. It deals with, be honest, because while I would speak here, and I want to say this, addressing specifically, and I have no problem, gay and lesbian individuals, you should know veterans are overrepresented in the homeless community. And so having a policy on dealing with homelessness will catch everybody. If I said something here that wasn't also cognizant of the fact that our Vietnam veterans and veterans overall are representative oversampled in the homeless population, I'd be taking care of one population at the expense of a population who have given a great deal to this country. They have huge drug problems, huge homelessness problems, and employment problems. So I will have a policy that makes sure we as a city deal with homelessness, not to take care of one community versus another, but to also, I want you to know, acknowledge, because they are our fellow residents. Veterans are overrepresented in the population of homelessness because of other issues that they are struggling with.
Your fourth question will be related to transgender rights. This question comes from Joe Urbantrout of Logan Square. How do you plan to address allegations of abuse of trans Chicagoans at the hands of the Chicago Police Department?
Well, here's another place. I mean, let me back up because it encompasses two questions. You can't hear? That's what this is? Okay. Can you hear now?
Yes. Yes.
I will say this is the first time everybody said that they can't hear me. But I'll deal with that. One, as you know, obviously, we're going to have a new CEO of the schools. We're also going to have a new superintendent of the police department. Just a fact. I'll be looking for a new superintendent. Those two appointments, outside of a couple others, are probably the most significant appointments I will make if I'm elected mayor or if somebody else is elected mayor. And who we hire has to know that part of their process is dealing with the community as a transgender community and the sensitivity to the police department as it relates to both harassment and brutality. And that means that the police department is trained throughout, and I keep coming back to this, because too much of what we think about as a city is located on the north side. Gay and lesbian and transgender people live throughout the city. And so it's a training for the entire police department, not just a few district offices.
Okay. Thank you. Your last question this evening is related to public safety.
Is this the final round?
The final round.
Okay. U.S. history, 200.
Chicago Gay History 200. Last year in Chicago, the LGBTQ community experienced many hate crimes across the city, from attacks on public transportation to the death of a transgender woman on the South Side. Now, with attacks happening outside of businesses in Boys Town, the concern for safety has risen among the community. What are your specific plans to reduce the number of hate crimes against LGBTQ people?
Now, I'm going to just say this. I've been focusing on the future, but our ability to talk about hate crimes and making sure that we're seeing this through, I'm going to take 1 minute in advocacy of what President Obama accomplished in passing that legislation on behalf of Matthew Shepard and making it landmark legislation as part of his administration. And it is a significant deal in our ability to even have a question and discussion, because let's be honest, 3 years ago, that question is what are we going to do to help pass it? It's now the law of the land. And that's been a 10-year struggle to get to this point. And if I can, as having been the chief of staff when we negotiated that, I am proud that is both the law of the land and it was signed by President Obama. Second is, we have those, obviously those laws on the book for a reason, and to make sure that there's I feel like I'm always going in and out on this. Is that true? I don't think the lower one is working. That's it. So making sure that we enforce that law because it was passed for a purpose. It was not to make us feel good. It was not for basically just to be up there on neon for a day of signing. But those laws are on the books, and they're to be enforced with the full force of the law, carried out at every level.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Emanuel.
I was just enjoying this. Okay, thank you very much. I want to say one thing. Sure. While we focused on a particular set of issues, we as a city face common challenges. The only question, whether it's on crime, education, or our economy, is whether we will face those issues with common purpose. Now, I think it's very important because as a community, you're part of the city, a diverse part of the city, and I look around the room here and I see the promise of Chicago in all its diversity. And you appropriately ask questions that specifically affect gay and lesbian and transgender members of our city. But remember, one thing I want to do as mayor is bring the city together as one. Because if we face those common challenges, whether they be our school systems, whether they be our fiscal situation, or whether they be our crime problem, obviously they affect different communities differently, but they are our common challenges that must be met with common purpose. That is how we will be a stronger city as we work through the challenges we face. And I want to thank you for your dedication and your love for the city, and most importantly, Adler, for hosting this and for what you do to make this a stronger and better city. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'd like to welcome our second candidate, Ms. Carol Moseley Braun. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have 5 questions with 3-minute responses for each question. Your first question will be related to education. This question comes from Maritza Nazario of Hermosa. What do you propose to do in order to support safe queer programs and activities in neighborhoods where tolerance and acceptance are very limited?
Oh, okay, that was the question. Well, I think in the first place we should have, well, first off, let me thank everybody for this forum and for inviting me, and I will try to just be really punchy in my responses. I'm very proud of my record on these issues. I'm a member of the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame and was an outspoken advocate while I was a member of the United States Senate as well as the Illinois House of Representatives. So I'm looking forward to answering these questions because in most cases it's something I've already done something positive for the community on. With regard to safe working schools, I believe that we have to have zero tolerance for bullying in the schools. I believe we have to have an LGBT liaison team within the Chicago public school system. Well, let me start off. I think we have to have an educator at the head of that system, not just someone who treats our children like so many widgets on a spreadsheet. And I believe also that between the training for the school system administrators as well as for the police, I think that those are 2 essential elements to seeing to it that we have a safe environment in the schools for every child.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for the length of the next question. We had 32 organizations putting together questions. So this is a little long. You got a little bit breathing room here. Okay. City Hall has not increased city corporate funding for HIV prevention, housing, and care services since 2007. Meanwhile, an estimated 30,000 Chicagoans are living with HIV/AIDS, including an estimated 7,000 who remain unaware of their HIV status, which puts them at severe risk of health complications and can result in unintended HIV infection to others. Recent studies show that communities of color, and particularly gay and bisexual African American men and Latino men, as well as transgendered persons citywide, experience the highest incidence of HIV in Chicago. The data also suggest that a significant amount of people in the highest risk categories were unaware of their HIV-positive status at the time that they were surveyed. Please describe your approach to Chicago's HIV/AIDS crisis with emphasis on city funding, public and private partnerships, and priority strategies as it relates to the most impacted populations with the LGBTQ community. Thank you.
Thank you. Essentially, we have to get the city out of the business of doing things it doesn't do very well. And that includes providing services to the LGBT community in regards to HIV and AIDS. And I believe that the city, that the funding that we have would be better put if we allowed those volunteer organizations, those NGO organizations that are already providing services to do the job on behalf of the city. And so that gets to the public-private partnership to which you refer, that we should strengthen and encourage those partnerships. We should make sure that there is equitable distribution by communities. Right now, not to have HIV/AIDS services readily available on the west side of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, in outlying areas. It's all concentrated in one area. We need to make sure that the Hispanic community, the African American community, get a reasonable and equitable distribution of funding for HIV and AIDS prevention, because as you well know, the African American community is the fastest rising group to suffer from the plague or the scourge of HIV/AIDS. I use the wrong word, plague, but to suffer from HIV/AIDS, and I believe that we should have services such as Howard Braun and others in other parts of the city of Chicago. Then we can build on what we have, but also make sure that there's additional distribution and access throughout the city of Chicago, and break down the silos that are keeping our funding from going around to the organizations that are presently providing important services.
Thank you. Your third question will be related to youth homelessness. This question comes from Kevin Harris of Lakeview. As there are a disproportionate number of LGBT youth that are homeless, and there are a shortage of supportive networks for them, what initiatives do you plan on instating to provide them with support as they work towards self-sufficiency?
You know, just the other day, I was headed up to WTTW, and driving down Foster, coming off of the 9094, and saw literally an entire homeless village under the bridges. The idea that in Chicago at this time we would have that kind of homelessness is something that should be shocking to every Chicagoan. And so we have a homeless issue and a homeless problem overall, and it is that tragedy of that is compounded when they are homeless youth who don't know or don't have the ability to find refuge. Right now, the Center on Halsted actually does provide accommodations for young people. I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry. Accommodations for young people, but again, the services are just there, and if a young person does not know that those services are available, that that's a place where they can safely go, because a lot of the homeless shelters are dangerous places, frankly. And so I think to make certain that we have shelters and options, both with regard to placement in existing facilities, as well as long-term and permanent low income and moderate income housing for LGBT youth and for LGBT seniors. We have the problem with seniors. We have the problem with the larger population in terms of homelessness. So homelessness is going to require, I think, a concerted approach to deal with this issue that is related to poverty, mental illness, and a lot of other things, social issues such as LGBT young youth.
Thank you. Your fourth question will be related to transgender rights. Unlike Washington, D.C., San Francisco, New York, L.A., and other cities, the Chicago Police Department does not have a written and enforceable policy on dignified treatment of transgender individuals. In the absence of a general order and education on this matter, we have seen high levels of reported mistreatment and abuse of transgender persons at the hands of police officers. Would you support the adoption of a general order for treatment of transgender individuals while in custody of the Chicago Police Department that also upholds the dignity of transgender individuals? How will you work with the transgender community while ensuring implementation of that general order?
Well, in the first place, I believe that law enforcement can't just be top down, it's got to be bottom up. That means that the communities that are served by our law enforcement personnel have to be an active, integral part of the policy making for the with the Chicago Police. Yes, I would support a general order, in short, and I think it is important to require training of the police officers in terms of dealing with the LGBT community and other communities of interest. You'd be almost, perhaps maybe not, but what I found is that there are other communities, the Asian community, for example, that feels that it's left out, the African American community that feels that it's picked on. You know, we have to get the sensitivity up and the education up for the people who are supposed to be serving us in providing public safety. And so my prescription for law enforcement across the board is to strengthen the bond, strengthen the ties between the community and the individuals they are supposed to serve, to make certain that every community is treated with respect and properly given opportunities to provide for public safety in their areas.
Thank you. Your final question this evening is related to public safety. Last year in Chicago, the LGBT community experienced many hate crimes across the city, from attacks on public transportation to the death of a transgender woman on the South Side. Now, with attacks happening outside of businesses in Boys Town, the concern for safety has risen among the community. What are your specific plans to reduce the number of hate crimes against the LGBTQ community?
Well, in addition to enforcement, which is we just discussed, there's the matter of setting a tone in the city that is that a tone of zero tolerance for hate crimes, and that's non-negotiable. The fact of the matter is that that a lot of conduct, such as hate crimes, comes out of a climate of opinion and a climate around these issues. And I think that if we continue to make it a point that this is a city that includes all and excludes none, if we make the point that human rights, LGBT rights are human rights, and that every person is entitled to human rights in the city of Chicago, and every person and that as mayor, I will demand that our police department accord those rights and record that respect to every person without regard to sexuality, status, race, ethnicity, or religion. That's fundamental. That's a fundamental issue for me, and so that would be my answer to that question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Braun. We did allow Rahm Emanuel took time to say a final goodbye, so we'd love to have a final statement from you as well.
Thank you very much. My final statement is this. I have, the best way to tell what somebody's going to do is by looking at what they have done. I have a record on these issues that is second to none in the United States. I was one of 14 United States senators to stand up against the so-called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, and I actually opposed the president when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was first introduced during the Clinton administration. I have been there on the floor in the forefront on these issues consistently and without wavering, and I say the exact same thing on these issues in whatever fora I may be. I support marriage equality, and I have for years, precisely because marriage is a human right, in my opinion, and I believe that the LGBT community is entitled to human rights, just as I would expect those same human rights for myself as an African American and as a female. Maybe when you come out of the perspective of looking like me, you become doubly sensitive, I hope, to the travails and concerns of others. And this is something that I have been concerned about, worked on, and devoted my life to promoting in my career in public service. And so I pledge to you to work with you. Should I become the next mayor of the city, I will work with you, I will consult with you, and we will work together to make this the friendliest city in the entire United States of America, San Francisco included, for the LGBTQ community. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we would like to welcome our third candidate, Mr. Miguel del Valle. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We have 5 questions, which have 3 minutes per question to answer, and then a final closing statement at the end. Your first question will be related to education. Would you support the Chicago Public Schools Administration or take a leadership role with no administrative leadership in mandating professional development for all school personnel on dealing with bullying, harassment, and violence issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity, to ensure compliance with the new law in Illinois, SB 3266, Prevent School Violence Illinois? How will you ensure that appropriate strategies and programs are put in place, and what positions, if any, would you create to oversee this process? Thank you.
Well, first of all, of course, we have to establish policies. And then we have to ensure that the professional development activities, this is kind of low here. We have to ensure that policies are in place and that then the professional development activities include training, ongoing training on those policies. And then you can have all the policies in the world and all the training in the world that you want, but if there isn't a documentation and a process of monitoring to see whether or not the policies are being appropriately implemented, if you don't have that monitoring and that documentation process in place, then you won't get the kinds of results that you need. And so all of that needs to be done at the same time. The procedures need to be put into place after the policies are put into place, and then the process for documenting and for monitoring and sharing that information on an ongoing basis with the central administration and the superintendent is absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you. Your second question will be related to HIV and AIDS. This question comes from Ernie Braun of the South Loop. How would you grade A, B, C, D, or F HIV education and prevention efforts in African American and other minority neighborhoods in Chicago? And as mayor, what would you do to improve education and prevention?
Well, first let me say that as a state senator in the late 80s, Dr. Ron Sable approached me and asked me to be a member of the AIDS Foundation. And I joined the board. I was there for a while. And one of my concerns back then was that the AIDS Foundation was not doing enough to reach out to the African American and Latino communities. And then as a legislator, years later, I took on Governor Rod Blagojevich when he cut funding for minority HIV/AIDS outreach. And I had a big fight with the governor over that. And I didn't only say something myself, I brought the whole Latino caucus on board to take him on those cuts. And as a result of our fight, those dollars were restored. And so it is extremely important that we have adequate funding to reach out to the African American and Latino communities and other communities as well, the Asian community, because over the years, while the activism has been there for the gay and lesbian community and the bisexual and transgender community, the fact of the matter is that African Americans and Latinos are still not being reached the way they need to be reached, with the services that need to be provided. And so I look forward to the day when we have real equality, because even within the gay community, there is some classism. You know that. It exists. And I see it right now, even in this mayoral election, where some individuals are thinking business and economics before they think of anything else. And so I'm a mayoral candidate who is going to put people first in our neighborhoods, in our communities throughout the city of Chicago, and I will promote and fight for equality. Because if we're going to really stand up and fight on issues, the kinds of issues that you're concerned about, then there has to be equality across the entire city of Chicago. And we have the African American community and the Latino communities that are still very much underserved, and that is something that I intend to do a lot about.
Thank you. Your third question will be related to youth homelessness. Over the course of 1 year, approximately 15,000 youth experience homelessness throughout Chicago, of which approximately up to 46% of these youth identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. How will you address youth homelessness as it relates to the LGBTQ community, specifically addressing the lack of housing options and lack of diversity training for service providers that deal with homelessness?
Well, the diversity training is absolutely necessary. And again, there have to be clear policies in place and enforcement as we deal with contracts, whether it's through CDBG or other sources of funding, state funding. And so those procedures, those policies need to be in place. But I have a track record in dealing with these issues. And that is what distinguishes me from the other candidates, is that I've had both feet firmly planted in the neighborhoods for decades, and I have been the deliverer of services. I have been a provider of services. So one of the things I did as a state senator was support of funding for Casa Norte, one of the few homeless youth shelters in the city of Chicago. And that was done, as a matter of fact, it was located in my old legislative district office. They bought the building and they established a program. It is a tiny little program that is needed across the entire city for gay and lesbian, transgender youth throughout the city. And we need those opportunities because we know of the hardships that are faced by youth when they're rejected by their family and when they end up on the street and when they're rejected at school or bullied at school. You need to have the network in place that is going to ensure that those individuals are receiving the type of assistance, the support that they need within the communities where they live. Because I am a believer that people have to stay in their neighborhoods. They have to deal with the situation, and in the process, we help educate the broader community about the importance of making sure that everyone is treated humanely.
Thank you. Your fourth question will be related to transgender rights. Unlike Washington, D.C., San Francisco, New York, L.A., and other cities, the Chicago Police Department does not have a written and enforceable policy on dignified treatment of transgender individuals. In the absence of a general order and education on this matter, we have seen high levels of reported mistreatment and abuse of transgender persons at the hands of police officers. Would you support the adoption of a general order for treatment of transgender individuals while in custody of CPD that also upholds the dignity of transgender individuals? How will you work with the transgender community while ensuring implementation of that general order?
Well, first of all, it's incredible that in this day and age we even have to pose the question about how police officers treat human beings. Human beings. I mean, there should be no question about proper conduct regarding the treatment of all human beings. And of course, then the question is, what happens when there is not the proper treatment, the proper behavior on the part of police officers? What are their policies in place? How does the supervision of those police officers aid in making sure that behaviors are modified on the part of law enforcement? And it is important that there be the reporting mechanisms in place, because if these incidents of inhumane treatment, of brutality, of any kind of mistreatment are not reported and documented, then we are not able to then ensure that the policies are adequately implemented throughout the department. So training is very important, beginning at the very beginning at the police academy. But after the training, then there's the matter of supervision and what supervisors do out in the field to make sure that whenever there's a report of some sort, disciplinary action is taken with those police officers.
Thank you. Your last question this evening is related to public policy. This question comes from Christina Carl of Rogers Park. How important will awareness of and a commitment to the Shepard Act be in selecting your first police superintendent, the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Act, nationally?
Again, there are laws in place. Thanks to the work done by many people here in this room and all over the country, we've made tremendous progress. And it just didn't come easy. And so we want to make sure that the laws are fully implemented. And I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but it is a matter of monitoring. It's a matter of ensuring that through training and through whatever steps are necessary, that the laws are being fully implemented. And if they aren't, we shouldn't have to wait a year or 2 or 3 years to make that determination. Because if the mechanisms for reporting are in place, then we will be able to make the necessary adjustments in order to make sure that the laws are fully respected and fully implemented.
Thank you very much. Would you like to have any final words for our audience here?
No, my final words are, this is an historic election coming up. It's a wonderful opportunity to chart a different course for the city of Chicago. And we do need a new course in the city of Chicago, one that puts neighborhoods first, one that has communities coming together, one that eliminates all those artificial boundaries that were established years ago when people decided in some planning department that Chicago would be divided into 77 community areas. And then on top of that, the realtors and the developers came in and added a few more and created, for marketing purposes, new community areas. And so we really have more than 77. My goal is to bring Chicago together and to have one city and to convert the city that works into the city that works together. Because all the issues that we've talked about here tonight and other issues that I'll be talking about when I go to the Defender in a few minutes, all these issues can only be addressed if we have strong communities. And organized communities are strong communities. Unorganized communities are weak communities. And so the issue of the quality of public education, public safety, and all these other things that we've been talking about during this campaign can only be addressed if we concentrate on organizing our neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago and bringing people together to begin to really eliminate social, racial, and economic segregation in the city of Chicago. And your role is so important in this process. It must be a matter of ensuring that the city is representative and reflective of all segments of the population. We can do that. We can have a city where there is true equality, where there is no discrimination. And that's not pie in the sky. That's not me being idealistic. It is the potential that's there. And then if we reach that, then we can become the world-class city that some people say we already are, but we really aren't. Because as long as we don't have world-class neighborhoods, we can't have a world-class city. But we can reach that goal. It can be done with your help and the help of many others who are out there whose voices are being drowned out by multi-million-dollar campaigns from people who want to pay to influence and want to set the agenda for this city and are not interested, not a whole lot, in what happens in the many neighborhoods in the city of Chicago who have been waiting for this opportunity to have a real voice in an election that gives them real choices. So I urge you to continue to do more of what you've been doing, and I look forward as mayor to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.